A few months ago, after the announcement of Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, I went to you, my community, for your ideas, theories, and wishes concerning the next installment in the storied Fire Emblem franchise. And while a lot of you had very interesting theories and ideas, I realized that I never shared what I wanted out of the next Fire Emblem game. So that's what we're going to do in today's video. Mind you, this is not going to be a theory video, as I think there are enough of those out there, and I don't really want to regurgitate what you've probably heard in 1,000 other videos. But this is more of a list of wishes that I want out of the next Fire Emblem game, that one being Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. So let's not dilly-dally around too much, and let's get right into this video with my first wish. And that is a good difficulty curve. And when I say this, I have to be a tiny bit more precise. I do not mean from map to map within any given difficulty settings in a game. I think Fire Emblem does a great job at that, generally speaking, that is. No, I mean from one difficulty to another. Very often in Fire Emblem games, it feels like there isn't a logical bump in difficulty between each difficulty. And let me use Fire Emblem Three Houses as an example, which feels pretty relevant to Fortune's Weave, as it is set in the same universe, so a similar design philosophy will be expected out of that game. So recently I've been replaying Three Houses, since I've never finished the game, actually, if you didn't know that. But I wanted to get prepared for Fortune's Weave, and I thought the best way to do so would be to jump into Three Houses to at least get a good idea of the lore and story of that game. But when booting up this new playthrough, I thought to myself, why not play this game on maddening difficulty? I have a full channel almost dedicated to Fire Emblem. I've done a ton of different challenges on this channel, and I've beat many FE games on their hardest difficulty. So how hard can this be for a full first playthrough? Okay, I was wrong. It was a little bit more difficult than I thought. I was not prepared for Three House maddening difficulty, okay? I thought it would be easier. But after doing some research, I was informed that Three Houses maddening difficulty isn't well designed without having prior hand knowledge of the different mechanics and builds that make the experience a much easier thing. Which, honestly, I'm fine with. The hardest difficulty of any game is usually a lot more approachable with prior knowledge of the game's mechanic. So, I decided to do the logical thing, drop the difficulty a little bit to hard mode, and come back and beat maddening in a later playthrough once I'm more familiar with the different units, the skills they have, the skills each class provides, and the different gambits that are provided throughout the game. All these things, once I'll have more knowledge of it, will make the difficulty much more approachable. Well, when I did drop the difficulty to hard, despite my units being vastly underleveled from the limited maddening mode experience gain that you get, I just started stomping through the game. Despite this still being hard mode, any shred of friction that was left in the experience disappeared, and I stopped losing units or facing any challenge on pretty much all maps following Chapter 5. I just kind of started deathballing my group forward and winning easily. It didn't really feel like hard mode. It felt like I had switched to easy mode, which there's nothing wrong with, but as someone who likes a challenge, it just felt a little too easy. And it left me a little disappointed. But it also made me think back of other Fire Emblem experiences I've had before. And it made me realize that there is very often that huge gap between the hardest mode and the one before that. For example, in FE7 also, you have a huge disparity between Hector hard mode and Eliwood hard mode, or even Hector normal mode. or in Awakening, where Lunatic and Hard feel like completely different experiences. This is often a common theme within the series that I think comes to the detriment of overall game design. The gap between that final difficulty level and the one right before that often feels so large that the idea of playing on hard or any other difficulty setting first to learn the game's mechanic is almost obsolete, as once you enter the quote-unquote maddening mode of the game, it feels like you're relearning a brand new game, because the previous difficulty mode was so easy comparatively speaking, that even the things you may have believed to be strong don't perform as well anymore, or even the same for that matter. This isn't to say that I want all difficulty levels to get extra hard in Fire Emblem, not at all. I think normal and easy modes are great things to have in these games. It's a great accessibility setting that allows casual gamers to enjoy the story and the series, and even might inspire players to bump up the difficulty a bit as they replay a game they like, if those initial mechanics are engaging enough to want to challenge themselves. I just think that the hard mode difficulty, the one that's like right before the maddening difficulty, should act more as a bridge to get into that hardest difficulty. What we're currently seeing in Fire Emblem very often is there's a chasm that's created between both those difficulty, which just discourages players to go for that extra maddening playthrough to really challenge themselves. As with Three Houses, playing the game on hard mode tends to leave you wholly unprepared for what maddening is gonna feel like, and that to me is a hallmark of poor game design. So I just really want Fortune's Weave to have a hard mode that acts as that bridge into maddening. And I will say that it's not always poorly done. I just think it happens often. I think Engage, the last Fire Emblem game that was released, does a great job at this, as the hard mode to me had enough friction to feel like I was playing a difficult game, which encouraged me once done with that playthrough to immediately try maddening the moment I had unlocked it. And while it felt significantly more difficult in maddening, I felt like I was properly prepared by the hard mode difficulty, as it was close enough to the maddening one for me to understand where the stress points in the playthrough would be from my previous experience, as I had struggled and had felt friction during my hard mode playthrough. And I hope that Fortune Weaves takes a page out of Engage on that front and has a more logical difficulty progressions between difficulty settings. All right, let's move to point number 4, and it might be a controversial one. I don't want too many supports. And I know people love supports in these games, and I do too. I'm not a hater of the social aspect in Fire Emblem. I'm like 90% sure that's the reason Fire Emblem stuck with me so much as a kid, is that it had this additional social layer on top of the strategy gameplay that made it feel so unique. But I think that in the past era of Fire Emblem, we may have been overdoing it with the amount of potential supports each character has. And while this tends to be more true for the avatar characters or the main characters of the game, who can support with literally every other character, which does lead to a lot of, in my opinion, shallow supports that tend to act more as a mirror of that other character's personality than creating an actual meaningful relationship between two characters. But even outside of the main character, I think that having most other characters be able to have 14 to 15 different support partners is way too much, especially considering the games now allow you to support everyone and don't limit you like they used to 5 support levels, as it was the case in the GBA games. And I'm actually for allowing characters to reach A rank support with all their support lists, as it just makes a more smooth and complete experience for the player. It allows the players to enjoy the full extent of the character's personality without having to go read what you missed online or do a million other playthroughs to unlock everything. But I still think it needs to be toned down a bit. What we're seeing right now, given the major amount of available supports and option to build up those support, is that it bogs down the gameplay loop, in my opinion. You spend 30 to 45 minutes sometimes in game just listening to support conversations to clear out your list. And when you open up that support tab and see 8 different conversation availables, it is a little disheartening at times. So I would love it if Fortune's Weave limited the amount to something like a maximum of 8, which is one more than the max that was available in GBA and Tellius era Fire Emblem. You'd still be able to grow those relationships between characters and discover character's full personality, but you wouldn't overwhelm the player with too much downtime between battles. And I also think that the current way supports are done is one of the reasons why some of the supports in Engage in Three Houses tend to be disregarded sometimes by a portion of the community. It's because there's an overabundance of them that leads to players not really caring about some characters as much. Like, let's take for example Celine from Fire Emblem Engage, who most people like myself overlooked all the subtleties of the character because after 15 different C supports about motherfucking T, it's easy to dismiss the character as one note and just skip her supports after overexposure to the same repeated theme over and over again, paired with all the other characters that function more or less in the same way in their supports. Having less of that bloat would make more player explore the depth of these characters, or at least encourage them to not skip over those conversations as much, as they would have less supports to listen to between maps instead of this unending list that sometimes feels more like homework than fun. So I say that getting rid of a little bit of that bloat and making the supports a little bit more impactful themselves by having a little bit less of them might make the experience more fun overall. All right, next up is number 3. And once again, on this theme of more focus and less bloat, I would like a more focused hub world. And no, I'm not saying no hub world. Look, I'm not a fan of them. Like, at all in Fire Emblem. I think they've been done poorly in both Engage and Three Houses. I think they're really just poor versions of the FE10 and FE9 base menus. It's just more bloat than interesting gameplay to me. But with that being said, I think wishing for no hub worlds would be stupid and dumb because that is not the direction of modern Fire Emblem. They aren't going anywhere. These hub worlds are here to stay. We also know from the Fortune's Weave trailer that you can seem to travel from that third-person open world aspect as you could in the last 2 installments, so I kind of think that indicates a hub world. We don't really know yet, but I'm willing to accept that they're here to stay, but I want them to be a lot more focused. While I think the Samiel was slightly better than the Monastery of Three Houses, it still felt like a lot of running around for an hour between each chapter to get everything done. And I want us to trim that down because setting up your team for the following map shouldn't be taking hours for the player. This is a strategy game after all. We want to be doing some strategy. Something I would suggest would be to get rid of all the multiple shops. Just have one shop with a bunch of different tabs for items, for weapons, for even forging if you need it to be in there. Just keep it focused to one spot. Putting things like the training grounds behind doors and loading screens just bogs down the experience. Find a way to put that in the main world so you can just transition to it seamlessly and quickly. Any activity related to training a skill, stat, or gaining experience should be regrouped in the same area to limit useless travel time. Same thing for social elements, regroup them in a close by area to reduce travel time. Just put it all in the same area. You can even have mini games in there if you really want, but make sure those areas just work together logically and are combined efficiently. I really don't need to run across a map to talk to one NPC that's going to give me a find X character quest who is never in the same spot from one time to another, but this time he is conveniently located at the furthest possible location from the original NPC. That stuff is just bloat, it's annoying, and it's uninteresting padding, especially considering that these games are already 50+ hour experiences. You don't need to pad that gameplay with useless running around. And if you're about to comment that I should just fast travel from one point to another, since you can do that, then I'll retort to your comment by saying that if that's the intended way to do things, why wasn't the whole thing just a flipping menu in the first place? Again, in a perfect world, I think hub worlds should be removed entirely, but they're here to stay. Just make their navigation simpler, shorter, and less of a hassle. Thank you very much. Moving on to my second biggest wish, we need to bring back unique unit feel. I think that in modern Fire Emblem, unique unit feel has taken a crazy nosedive because, of course, unlimited reclassing makes it that each unit can be anything at any time. While I don't hate the ability to reclass as a whole, as you can sometimes do some really fun builds. I'm specifically thinking of my warrior clan in Engage, which was one of the most fun units I've ever built. But because of that ability to reclass, each unit feels like it doesn't have its own identity anymore. For example, if you think of Lyn in Fire Emblem 7, automatically you think of swords, you think of dodging, and you think of low damage, high crit, Myrmidon-esque unit. There's a clear association made by everybody that's the same about that unit. That unit's identity is clear, it's well defined, and it makes sense within the lore of the game and within the gameplay of the game. But for example, if you bring up a unit like Lapis, well, the only reason the idea of a sword might come up to you is because that's the weapon she starts with. But beyond that, everybody has a different sort of experience with that character because they've built her somewhat differently. Because of the overabundant amount of skills, the overabundant amount of classes that are available to all units. And because you can do whatever you want with each character, it makes the idea that the classes are more important than the units themselves. Yes, when thinking of FE8, when you think of Seth, you think of character that is OP, and that is partially because of his class, but it's also very much because of his stats growth that are unique to him. The Seth experience is clear because everybody has the same one, or generally a similar one. In games like Three Houses, when a class becomes good, you don't think of the characters, you think of the class. So if that class is OP, then you can simply make all your units that class and win. And if the unit can infinitely reclass, they just become another face in the crowd, and you lack the capacity for niche or specialist units to exist, as everyone can do a little bit of everything. There's also the problem of units look that comes with this, where all the classes being available to all the units make it that all the outfits more or less look the same, which might not seem like a huge deal, but flair is a defining factor of any unit's uniqueness. Think back of games like FE7, where each character's color scheme immediately defines the unit. You know it's Lowen on screen because he has a yellow armor, or Isadora, who has the ponytail that no other paladin has in FE7. These defining characteristics play immensely in the uniqueness of each unit. And I think that while limiting a unit to one promotion would be a step back, I think the next FE game should reduce the amount of reclassing available to a unit. A sword unit, I think, should remain to some degree a sword unit upon promotion, with a handful of potential classes to go into, but they should be linked to what their original character is, either in personality or in classes. The promotion lines should be somewhat logical at first glance and fit under the unit's presentation and identity, which I think is something that is very much lost in the later installments of Fire Emblem. And for my final wish for Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, I do want a story that stands out on its own. We know that this game takes place in the exact same world as Three Houses, and while that game does, in my opinion, a phenomenal job in terms of presentation of lore and world building, I think that Fortune's Weave needs to exist as its own entity without using Three Houses as a storytelling crutch to keep the players engaged. This game will for sure build on the already established lore and probably sneak Easter eggs for eagle-eyed players to notice and feel rewarded because they've paid attention. And that's good. But I want this game to build a strong foundation on itself, as some players might pick this up as their first Fire Emblem title. And the last thing you want, in my opinion, is for these players to be confused by what is going on because they didn't play Three Houses. And while this is a wish, I do want to say that I have quite a bit of faith in Fire Emblem as a series on that specific point. There's two reasons for that. The first one is I think Fire Emblem as a series is quite used to writing these duologies. I think that most games in the series are part of either a duology or like non-linear sequels of each other. There's plenty of examples of that within the series, of telling stories in the same world without relying on the previous game for that story to exist. So I think Fire Emblem already does a pretty good job at that. And my second reason is because of how I personally experienced Fire Emblem very early on in my life. So as most of you guys know, my first Fire Emblem game was Sacred Stones, but my second Fire Emblem game was actually Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, which is the sequel to Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. My parents bought Radiant Dawn for me on the Wii, weirdly enough, not knowing it was a game in the same series as Sacred Stones, which they had bought me many years earlier on my Game Boy. They just bought it because I love strategy games and fantasy in general. So it was the logical choice for them. There was a freaking dragon on the cover, y'all. They were like, this is for Kratos. This is for this kid. He's gonna love this shit. Turns out they were really on point about that, but that's a story for another day. Anyways, I played FE10 fully, fell in love with the game, kept playing it for a couple of years, and then I found out about the existence of FE9 on the GameCube. Despite not knowing that this was a sequel to a young 11-year-old kid, the game was great on its own. And I think that's very important for Fortune's Weave to exist within that same framing. The story was not too confusing. Each element from the previous game was laid out clearly for me to understand. It maybe lacked a little complexity in its explanation, but what I needed to know was there. And to be fair, the same thing happened to me for FE7 before I found out it was the prequel to FE6, but it never felt like any of those games leaned heavily on their predecessor for them to exist. So I think Fortune's Weave needs to follow within that tradition, not relying on the player having played 3 houses to tell a compelling story. This story, as any strong piece of writing, should stand on its own 2 feet and deliver us another interesting facet that adds to the ever awesome lore of the 3 houses world. And that to me is probably the most important point. And yeah, those are my 5 biggest wishes for Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. Simple as that. I hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to let me know what you're looking forward to the most or what you want the most out of this new game, as I would love to hear what you all have to say in the comments of this video. And please do me a big favor and hit that like button if you enjoyed it. It helps me out a lot. Let me shout out all my YouTube members and Twitch subscriber who help support the channel every month, but a particular shout out goes to my tier 2 and 3 YouTube members, those being Brawler456, Forgotten Fox, Hirame, Case, Iron Wolf, Stormy CH, Stylish, A Grumpy Bear, Repload Zero, Goatnik3, and Rogue Arcadia. Thank you all for the support, and thank you for watching this video. And let me know in the comments what you want out of this game. Let me know. All right. Thank you for watching. See you all in the next video. Bye-bye.